So, the Seagull is an undisputed masterpiece of the modern theater. Arguably, it's the greatest play yet written in the modern theater. And so, as a director, where do you start taking on that piece of material, and then where do you proceed?
Well, I think you start with the play, and once you decide that it's worthy to attempt to bring the play to a cinematic experience, then in my case anyway, I started with who's going to play Irina Arkadina. And then when you're really lucky and you know Annette Bening,
Yeah.
and she says yes to the project, then you kind of could get anyone you want to write it. And so we went to Stephen Karam,
Right, who had big success with The Humans recently.
huge success, yeah, Tony Award winner, and an avowed Chekov fan, and someone he feels was a huge influence on him as a writer, and also a big Annette Bening fan. So when you bring him this idea, and then he delivers a beautiful screenplay. So that's really, I think, you have to want to tell the story cinematically, or else why bother?
Yeah. Now, at that stage, when you bring on the screenwriter, did you just say, do your take on this and then we'll talk, or did you issue some instructions?
Oh yeah, for sure. So the producer, Tom Hulse, had heard about a production of The Seagull, a stage production, many, many years ago, in which the director decided to begin the play with Chekov's fourth act and then go back to the beginning partway through. And that tickled him, and it stayed with him for years, and he long then decided that someday he might be able to produce a film that would do that, because that kind of flashback sensibility really lends itself to film.
Right.
So he mentioned it to me, and then the two of us talked to Stephen Karam and explained the concept, and that it would be in period.
Right. You've also said cinema can control time differently, and the viewer can experience the actions and reactions of characters in a very particular order.
Right.
You've mentioned one important aspect of, for the concept of the film, of that. Can you talk about some of the other choices of adaptation and editing for this four-act play?
For sure, absolutely. Because it's a film script, and film is automatically, it's a visual medium, every bit as much, if not more so, than a verbal medium. And theater is much more of a verbal. So Chekov would take an enormous amount of time to create a scene, and then the audience basically starts focusing in on what's happening underneath the surface of the scene, so that by the time the scene is over, you have a rich, deep understanding of what the character actually wants and what the other characters want, and by the resolution of the scene, you understand the depths to which they did or did not get what they wanted, right?
Right.
With film, that can be told very quickly, visually. So you don't need that much verbiage.
Right.
So one of the things Stephen could do was then really condense the story. And the assignment was to make the language as contemporary and apprehendable as possible, while still maintaining a kind of classic feel, so that you would really buy that you were in Russia, the turn of the century. So that was one thing that he had to do. And then you could really edit down the four acts to more like a three-act structure of a film. And I think that he did that really brilliantly, because when you can take something that evolves over time on stage and replace that with a close-up that is in response to an event that just happened, so much of that gets communicated immediately, and you don't have to. It doesn't have that same sort of temporal experience. So I think that's one thing. The other thing that you can do that you can't do on stage, at least not as effectively as film, you can create a kind of simultaneity so that and with different locations, so that on stage everything happens in front of that theater for the first act.
Right.
The second act is in the drawing room. It all plays out. All the action takes place in one place. But on film, and the way that Stephen wrote this, we could be upstairs, Irina could be in her bathtub, and downstairs Konstantine's playing the piano, Masha's outside looking for Konstantine, Boris and Nina are on the boat, Soren is asleep on the porch. You get the sense of all of these lives. You can cut back and forth, and it brings a richness of the life of the estate, which becomes, in a sense, another character in the story.
Now, there was a reading of the script, I know initially. Can you talk a bit about what you learned from that, and then to what extent did you have time for rehearsals? What was the work with the actors like before cameras rolled?
Right. Okay. The very first reading we did was about 4 years ago, and we got a room at the Public Theater in New York City, and Annette and Corey Stoll and Saoirse Ronan were all part of that reading, and we had other actors reading other parts, and that was just the first time that we could hear it. And from that point on, Stephen and I then went and edited down because it was too long, and there were many sections that still felt like a play. And so then we changed locations, and we figured out how to break it up more. Then we started the casting process, and during the casting process, you hear the scenes a lot as you're having auditions and stuff, so there was another edit that happened during that process. Once we then got the green light and we knew we were doing it and we had the cast, then and we found a location, then I could imagine in my head where stuff could actually happen in that place. So then Stephen and I went back, and I said, no, there's a solarium in this house. Let's use that for this. And the bedrooms are upstairs, and now the lake is this way, and you can shoot up from the lake to the house and down. And there's all these woods here, and there's this meadow over there. So we could use all the different elements of the actual place that we had. For rehearsals, I had a show on Broadway called Hedwig and the Angry Inch, and we were we were performing rather at the Belasco Theater, and they have a huge basement there. It's where who was it? Houdini had his disappearing elephant. They made this giant elevator, and a whole elephant would go down into the basement. So that whole basement area that was made for his elephant is where I would be, and the actors who were in New York and available would come and meet me there on odd hours, and we would just sit in that room and kind of rehearse scenes. We had a big reading at NYU. Right before we started shooting, we just read the whole screenplay out loud, and we all talked about it. So it was really like some table work that you would do if you were doing a play. And then Annette had everyone over for a dinner at her apartment, and we read through the play, the screenplay again. And again, it was like a play reading. It was great, and everyone started to feel comfortable with each other. And then once we were up at the set in Monroe, New York, everyone was there. We were all kind of living there because the shoot was so short. It was only 21 days. Right. So everyone was camped out like near where the set was. And we would have rehearsals on the set whenever we could and just try to jam them in between other setups and stuff. So it was not ideal, but it was still more than a lot of people get, I think.
Sure, yeah. Let's talk a little bit about working with Annette Bening. I guess she has a reputation for coming immensely prepared to the set. So, what were you able to give her, I guess, as a director, and what was she giving you, I guess?
Well, she's fantastic.
Yeah.
And she was really prepared, but she's also open to different interpretations. So, and she's such a pro. I mean, she's been making movies for quite a while, and she's so comfortable in front of the camera and understands all the different nuances that are available to the camera. So she was interested in what is the shot going to be. I mean, she really understood and where we were likely to use, you know, what and how it was going to fit into the other stuff. So she was incredibly helpful with that. So she understood how to gauge her performance. And for me, like, you know, you'd have to ask her how helpful I was to her, but I would like to think that I gave suggestions to push scenes in different directions so that we had a range of possibilities to choose from.
There are so many rich characters that make up the Seagull. Is there a particular character in there that resonates most for you, that you identify with?
You know, I will say that for most of my life, I really identified with Konstantin Treplev. I was a young actor. That was my dream when I was studying at NYU, and I would do scenes from the Seagull. I was always Treplev, and a handful of the very few successful acting classes that I did, because I was not a great actor at the end of the day, were working on this play and that character. So it always was very, I felt like I understood him. I think that every young actor feels that way about Konstantin. I think every young actress feels that way about Nina. But through the years, I've probably become more of a Trigorin because I'm established, I'm considered fairly successful in my career and in the circle that, you know, in the theater in particular, where I do most of my work. And I still feel like a fraud half the time. I feel like I'm going to be found out. I feel like, am I making choices that are cynical in some way? How do I justify my existence as an artist? Am I an artist? Am I just creating product? You know, all the things that go through your head. It's one of the I think one of the major themes of the play certainly is like at what cost art.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And how do we betray our creative spirit, and how do we honor it or not, and where do we go wrong? And I feel like Trigorin is wrestling with that all the time, and he's still a hedonist and a narcissist. But then working on the film, I relate to Masha. I relate to the doctor. I relate to Nina in ways that I didn't before. You know, so it's Chekov. This is what makes him a beautiful writer, is that the humanity and the foibles and the failures and the dreams and the optimism and the cynicism of all of these characters there's no hero, there's no villain. Yeah. Everyone is flawed and they're all human.
I think probably, you know, the average person coming to this movie might not realize the extent to which these parts are such rites of passage for actors. Mm-hmm. Any serious actor will have gone through the Seagull in some way and played one of those roles. Annette Bening had played Arkadina at ACT right here.
She did, yeah.
Right, when she was coming up and being trained. And you directed Uncle Vanya on stage as well, with Derek Jacobi and Roger Rees. What did you learn from that production? I guess, you know, having done both of these projects, you know, what have you learned about directing Chekov?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, Vanya was my first, and it was a beautiful cast. It was Derek Jacobi and Laura Linney and Brian Murray and Amy Ryan and the late, great Roger Rees. I mean, it was a wonderful cast and a beautiful adaptation. And it was definitely the hardest thing I've ever done. I don't think I was successful with it. I think there were fabulous rehearsals. We had great rehearsals. And Derek Jacobi, I mean, it was really the lineage right from Olivier to Jacobi. It was clear as day and beautiful to watch him. He would do so many different things. He was brave, and he led the company in a great way. So everyone felt completely liberated to try anything. It was dazzling to me. And I loved every minute of the rehearsals. And then when we got into production, we were on stage, and suddenly it was up there, and I thought, oh wow, everyone's in a different play. It feels like it wasn't cohesive. We thought, wow, this is really A, interesting, B, completely terrifying, and C, challenging, right? I had to figure out how to try to pull them all together at that point. And that's the director's job, and I think that I was so blown away by the talent, and I think intimidated by the material, that I just was trying to allow all sorts of stuff to flower with them. And so I think at the end of the day, I'm really proud of the attempt, and I think that the concept I had could maybe work, but I don't think it was entirely successful. There were some beautiful performances and great moments throughout for everyone who was in it. I think the big failure for me of that production was me. I think that, so the big thing I learned, and what I tried very hard to do while casting this and while working with Stephen, was to create one world where the audience would really believe that all of these people are in the same version of 1904 Russia.
Yeah. Were you informed by any particular earlier productions you had seen, or films of it, or adaptations of?
I have to tell you, no, I really wasn't. I've seen many productions over the years, and I have seen 2 of the films. I saw the Sidney Lumet version, which I think fell prey to my experience on Vanya, to be honest, and nothing against anyone involved or Sidney Lumet, who is a great filmmaker. It's really hard to do, and I thought, it's one of the reasons I took this on, actually, is because I didn't think there had been a definitive version. Not that I think this one is, but I felt that it was a worthy attempt, since I hadn't seen one. And then there was the filmed version of that, Williamstown, with Frank Langella and Blythe Danner, and that was more it was like a televised play as opposed to an actual film.
Right. You shot Seagull, as you said, in 21 days, in 2015, right?
Right.
Why has it taken so long to get it onto screens?
Well, for one thing, when we finished and I started doing my cut, I got a job to direct Funny Girl, which is something that was like a dream of mine, in London. So I actually finished the director's cut during the first 2 weeks of my rehearsals in London. So I'd be rehearsing Funny Girl during the day, and then I'd run to Soho and I brought my editor over. I flew her over to work with me for 2 weeks, because I still had 2 weeks left. So then we finished my cut there. But then I was in London for months. So it wasn't until late in the following spring that I could get back to it. So then when I got back to it, that was when the producers started they had made their cut, and then we started that negotiation. And we had to score it. And my composer, Nico Muley, whose music we had temped in, and a lot of the temp music we used is still in there, but then he had to compose a whole bunch of stuff. So he did that, and then we wanted to make changes in it. He was now unavailable to make changes, so we had to find the composer with whom he was, sort of from the same food chains. We found a film composer, Anton, who had also been Philip Glass's assistant. So it sort of was from kind of the same sensibility. That was the goal. And then he wasn't available until such and such a time. So by the time we finally got it together, it had been almost 2 years.
Yeah. Well, then they have to slate it, right?
Well, then the great thing was Michael Barker took a look at it and liked it very much, and said, I can't release it this year because I already have Annette's other film,
right? Film stars. Yeah.
So he said, if you guys, I know you want to get it out there, but if you could wait, then I would love to be presenting it. So here we are.
Right.
And it couldn't be better, actually, because in the meantime, Saoirse Ronan and Lizzie Moss are, really hot. And this film needs all the help it can get because it's Chekov.
Right.
Let's face it.
Yeah, right. Thanks. One of the things that directors always talk about, of course, is the commitment that it takes when you sign on to a project. You have to be deeply in love with the material because you're going to live with it for years.
Yeah.
And in doing my research on you, it was something that seemed to keep coming up, like how many years in you would be on a project like Spring Awakening was like an 8-year process for you, right? Mm-hmm. Anyway, I wanted to ask a little bit about that show. It seems to have sort of supercharged a younger generation of, especially musical theater goers, and made musical theater kind of sexy again. And there have been all these kind of projects sort of in its wake. I think Glee capitalized on it, and Smash came along, which you directed episodes of, and now there's this show, Rise, right? Can you talk about what you see as that show's legacy, and and when will we see a Spring Awakening film, do you think? It seems inevitable, and yet it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. I would say that the legacy of Spring Awakening, I don't know. I feel like what we really did sort of liberate a lot of other writers and creators of musicals to say, like, oh, you don't have to just do a movie as a musical. And you can challenge the form a little bit. Because with Spring Awakening, right, we had this old play that we adapted, this old German play, brilliant play, and then with this contemporary music, so that there was an intentional dichotomy between the songs and the book. And we exploited the juxtaposition. We didn't try to blur it at all. And I think that the fact that it worked so well and that it did speak to young people, and we had young people, brilliant young people in the cast who were very close to the age of the characters, and they could personalize the experience so that the performances were incredibly vital and immediate, and you felt like they were those characters. And then this music was so sublime, but completely contemporary. It didn't feel like an old-fashioned musical. It felt like a whole new way of using music and narrative, the way that they intersect and bump into each other, as opposed to grow organically out of one another. So I think that really did help shift things a little, even though that was not the intent. The intent was to tell that story the best way we could. In terms of a film of Spring Awakening, I have no idea what's happening with that. I think it could work, but you never know. You just
It'll
never
be
know.
another new challenge to figure out how to. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
You're in town with your production of Head Over Heels, and previously you did American Idiot first in Berkeley.
Yeah.
So the Bay Area seems to be a kind of a good place for you.
I love it.
Try out show.
Yeah. Great audiences, really smart audiences who I think they really love to see work in progress and seem. So far, anyway, over at the Curran, the audiences have been really, really happy with Head Over Heels, and they're getting some of the very sophisticated jokes in it, and they're embracing, again, another kind of, it's a kind of mashup, like Spring Awakening was, in a sense.
What drew you to that play, or how did you get involved?
I got, the producers sent it to me. There had been a production of it a few years ago in Oregon, and they really wanted to take it in a different direction, so they sent it to me, and I fell in love with it. It's such an audacious and crazy idea to take this 16th century romance, Elizabethan romance, and stick the songs of the Go-Go's into it. You know, it's like, in a way, it's right up my alley, right? Because again, it's juxtaposition and unapologetically. And I thought, wow, this could be really, really fun and challenging for an audience. Plus, you know, the way that we've started approaching it, and this is about almost 3 years ago now also, when we started adapting that version to the new version, the world had shifted a little bit. And as we were creating a story of female empowerment and gender identities and the concept of good government, we started working on it before the nightmare happened, of 2 Novembers ago. So the world has evolved with this show. We've been both moving in a direction to talk to the moment. So it's kind of interesting and unexpected.
Yeah. Back in 2004, when you were launching your film career, you said, I didn't really chart things out career-wise. I pretty much fell into place, and the variety has been wonderful. I never seemed to do the same type of project twice in a row.
Yeah.
And that seemed to continue to be the case since then, right? Which is great. From an outsider's perspective, I think it looks like a lot of fun to take on these different kinds of projects.
Yeah.
Are you at a point where you're turning down lots of offers and only doing your pick of the litter, or do you have to be aggressive about getting the opportunities you want?
I'd say it's a little bit of both. I think, honestly, because of how eclectic my career is, and because I haven't allowed myself to be pigeonholed in one particular area, I'm not like, I don't have, it's not like the airplanes are all stacked up for all the rock musicals I'm going to do, or all of the classical adaptations of films, so I don't necessarily know what's next. I know there are a lot of things out there that I'm doing, and I have turned down some incredibly lucrative stuff over the years. So in a sense, I can pick and choose and do, but sometimes the economics of it interfere, and so then I feel like I end up adding too many things to my roster to make sure that I've got gainful employment.
Right.
So it's a balancing act. But mostly, honestly, I'm super happy and feel extremely lucky that I've had the career I've had so far. And knock wood, I'll continue to make work that engages me.
Well, it's been a great pleasure talking with you. Best of luck with all of those things.
Thank you so much.